We are live.
Morning, everybody. Welcome back. Gillian is just going to do the roll call.
Good morning. My name is Gillian Balaban and I am Senior Coordinator Governance Relations at GRI. Welcome to this meeting of the Global Sustainability Standards Board, known by its acronym, the GSSB, held on 20 March 2025. This in-person meeting is being hosted from Amsterdam, the Netherlands. Please note that all public GSSB meetings are being recorded and you can find the audio recording on the GSSB meeting webpage, along with the high-level summaries of previous GSSB meetings. We are joined today with colleagues from the GRI Secretariat and guest speakers. We will now start the roll call. Anna Nefedova.
Here.
Thank you. Anne Lindsay.
Present.
Charles Chu.
Present.
Chalandra de Silva.
Present.
Felipe Martinez Rodriguez.
Present.
Galia Tisankova.
Present.
Julia Genuardi. Oh, sorry, Julia will join in a little while. Igazuma is in the building, but not in the meeting. She will join also later. Jeff Robertson.
Present.
Rebecca Coriat.
Present.
Thank you. Tommy Machiba.
Present.
Yan Dong.
Present.
And Susanna Muscat-Gorska.
Present.
And GSSB Chair Carol Adams.
Present.
Thank you all. GSSB member Deborah Ng sent her apologies. I will now hand over to the Chair, Carol Adams, to open the meeting.
Thank you, Gillian, and welcome everybody. So just to recap, yesterday we approved GRI 102 climate change, GRI 103 on energy. We heard from GRI's new CEO, and we also heard from David Atkin, the CEO of the PRI, and Paul Munter, former Chief Accountant of the US SEC and Chair of IOSCO's monitoring group. And we discussed public sector sustainability reporting, a research paper there, and approved some recommended further actions. Today we're talking about sector standards, and we have a paper on the global reporting system and a proposal for a project on guidance on impacts, risks and opportunities. And we will also start the discussions on our work programme for the next 3-year period. But to start with, it's our great pleasure to welcome Nobu, the chair of the Japanese Sustainability Standards Board. We have been in discussions for around 2 years now about areas of common interest and signed a memorandum of understanding at their standards board meeting in Japan towards the end of last year. Bastian and Tomu and I were there. And the purpose of the session today is to have a discussion about how that work might be conducted. And first of all, Nobu, I'd like to invite you to tell us why you think this work is important and what thoughts you have on how we might progress it.
Hey, thank you very much, Carol, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present today. Unfortunately, I could not travel to Amsterdam today, but it's my great pleasure to participate online. Before I directly answer the question, please allow me to spend a few minutes giving you an update on what we do as the Sustainability Standards Board of Japan and our corporate reporting environment in Japan, so that we get some context before we get into the real discussion. So first of all, the Sustainability Standards Board of Japan is an independent private sector organization, meaning we are not part of the government. We are a private sector organization funded by our membership system, which is mostly companies and accounting firms and others. We were established to be the counterpart to the ISSB, so that we issue standards in Japan that are aligned with the ISSB standards. We just issued our set of sustainability standards early this month. And we do have a few differences, but they're more to be consistent with our legal system and our legal framework. One of the points in our standard is that we do not prescribe who should report, who must report under our standards and from when. That is the regulator's decision to make. Our securities regulator will make that decision in the coming months or years. So that has not been determined yet. Based on our standards, our standards can be used voluntarily now that they're out, but no one is currently mandated to use them as of today. And although the securities regulator has not finalized their decision as to who should report, who must report from when, they have made some proposals to their advisory committee, and let me talk about that. So the idea is that the Tokyo Stock Exchange today has three markets. It's the prime market, the standard market, and the growth market. And the prime market is defined as companies will be listed in that market for those who are the global players, who have global investors, and who are expected to follow all the international standards. So the securities regulator has decided that they will focus on that market first for our standards to be applied. And within that market comprises about 1,600 companies today. But within those 1,600 companies, the securities regulator is proposing to implement our standards, require the implementation of our standards into several waves based on the market capitalization of the companies. The proposal is the first wave would be for those companies with 3 trillion yen in terms of market capitalization or more. The second wave would be 1 trillion yen or more, and the third would be 500 billion yen or more. And actually, the first wave would cover slightly more than half of the market capitalization of the total Japanese market. There'll be only less than 100 companies that will be within that group, but they are the very large companies in Japan. And for those, so we focus on this first group of companies that are likely to be required to report. And if we look at these companies, most of them historically have been providing sustainability information voluntarily. They've used various frameworks, various standards, and including GRI standards. And depending on who reports, but based on these reports, I would say more than 70% of these companies use GRI standards. They use others as well, but that is the kind of the trend in that. So these companies welcome the ISSB's initiative to try to integrate all the frameworks and standards that existed. But the problem is that the ISSB standards are more focused on the so-called single materiality or financial materiality, whereas these companies that have provided information voluntarily, they generally looked at the multi-stakeholders. So based on the so-called double materiality. So for them, they don't want to reduce disclosures because they need to follow ISSB standards or our standards, SSBJ standards. So they need to think of how to continue to report based on the new requirements. And in addition to that, most of these companies under the first wave will be subject to the European standards because they do have significant operations in Europe. So sooner or later, they will be subject to ESRS or CSRD standards, or CSRD requirements. And so so they are continuing to look at the impact assessment as well. We, as the SSBJ, the main responsibility is to develop standards that are aligned with the international standard, ISSB standards. But at the same time, we do want to consider the overall burden of the companies, so including those who will be required to report under the European standards, European requirements, and therefore we do seek interoperability with the European requirements, and that I think we look at GRI standards as well, because GRI standards are very much in line with the ESRS requirements. So with that, what we're trying to do, trying to get to answer the question is, we do want to go back to what companies think, how they assess their risks and opportunities. And I think during that thought process, they do have an impact assessment. And therefore, although we require our standards to be more focused on the financial materiality, we do want to try to come up with a way or trying to explain how the ideas or the thinking that goes behind interact with the impact assessment, how they connect to risks and opportunities. I think having discussions with Carol and
Recording in progress.
and her colleagues, I think we thought there was an opportunity for us to work together, and so I think that's where we get to agree to sign the memorandum of understanding. So with that, I think we haven't really started yet. We just we had focused very much on issuing our standards earlier this month, but now that the document is out, I think we can start doing some work on how we can integrate all of these thinking together so that we can have practice that basically integrates everything. So thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions or any comments.
Thank you very much, Nobu. Does anybody have any questions of Nobu? Do you have any thoughts on how to go about this, Nobu? I take it you have a clear objective to increase to get better take up of your standards, I guess, and more quality take up by starting with the impact reporting, because they're already doing that. They're already doing GRI reporting, about 70% of them you mentioned. Do you have any thoughts on how to go about helping to develop this approach to reporting on risks and linking that with the impact reporting that they're already doing?
Yes, thank you. I haven't really thought through yet, and I have to discuss it with my board. But my initial thinking is that we do go to these companies that actually have been reporting and will report under the new regime, and see how they think or how they would first come up with their way of looking at the risks and opportunities based on their impact assessment. So I think it's more of going to specific companies and to ask how they came up with all these assessments and how that would finally turn into the risks and opportunities and then reporting over there. So it's more to do a little research on more like interviews with each company.
I can see that being very helpful, and while others are thinking of the questions that they want to ask, let me ask, when you were doing your consultation on your SSBJ standards, did you get any input on that sheds any light on what companies are thinking about this particular issue in your consultation process?
The quick answer would be no. It was because the expectation was that our standards would be mandated by the securities regulator sooner or later. And I think the general sentiment was that they wanted almost perfectly aligned with the ISSB standards, and they would not try to add anything on top of it. But we already know that companies that voluntarily reported have done it based on the double materiality, and therefore, if they just stick to our standards, they would need to reduce disclosures, which they don't think is helpful at all. So it's more how to connect the voluntary reporting that they've done in the past, comply with what would be required under the securities regulations, but then not losing any information that had been reported. So I think that and also the thinking that goes behind the impact assessment and everything is likely to result in better reporting of the risks and opportunities. And I think what we want to do is to try to clarify what are the critical points in going through that thought process. So if we can generalize what the companies are doing, I think that would be a significant outcome of this project.
Thank you. I'll turn to, Agnes has got a question, and then I'll turn to Bastian with thoughts on how this might work as well. Agnes, sorry. Yeah, sorry. Sorry, that was terrible.
No problem at all. So this is Yin. I do have two questions. So the first one is, I don't know if it's a simple one. I mean, ISSB only have the general guidance and topics centered around climate change, right? If it's well aligned with ISSB, what are the companies are going to do with the rest of the topics? Are they just going to figure out something with their financial risk opportunities, or what is the plan? And yeah, the second question is that what is your target audience, or what is the company's target audience when they report or quoting to the SSBJs for the regulatory purposes or for market purposes, or yeah, what is the purpose and target audience?
Okay, thank you very much for the questions. On the first point, at least for the companies in the first wave, they voluntarily have reported information, and if we look at those reports, they don't necessarily limit their analysis to climate change. So I think they have a good idea of what they should report. We know that those who have not yet reported these kind of information, we need to provide more guidance on how to do it. And looking at the SASB standards may be a little bit too complicated, and we need to think of how to do that. But at least for this first wave that we're thinking about, they cover a lot, especially for human capital and others that are not necessarily climate change. So I think for this first group, I don't think we have many issues on that. The second is that so the idea is that the securities regulator will take it up. So it's more for securities purposes. It's for the investors, make it public. It will be part of the regulation. So it will be required, and there might be consequences if they don't follow the regulation. But the idea is to provide more information that's useful to investors. So we do have a financial materiality or investor-focused information provision for our standards. But our standards, basically any regulator can take it up. So if any other regulator other than the securities regulators decides that the company should use, the regulated companies should use our standards, then they will not be subject to securities regulations, but the other regulations. So our standards are neutral in that sense.
Thank you. Perhaps I could ask Tomu to also give some background about GRI reporting in Japan.
Yeah, thank you so much for speaking. And yeah, as Kawanishi-san said, it's, like GRI uptake is quite high in Japan. And, it's becoming a part of their corporate reporting. So, the companies, just wondering and how this sustainability reporting practice and this new regulation, how they combine or, they do kind of to streamline and procedures because of more sustainability reporting. It's managed by sustainability department of the company. On the other hand, and this regulatory disclosure, it's more, scope of the investor relations and the corporate management. And yeah, but also, I see quite high interest and after, announcement of this SSBJ standards. And even though, these standards probably applicable for very big companies, and so it's not a huge number of companies subject to the, this obligation, but still, I guess it's many companies refer to this financial materiality reporting. Let's see. And my question to the Kawanishi-san would be, is there any discussion with other countries' sustainability standards board about, what to do with this impact reporting and, this new ISSB-based reporting? And, we are happy to discuss with Japanese standard board, but also like we wish to discuss with the other countries and the standard board as well. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. So far, we haven't had the specific discussions on this topic, but we as the SSBJ have been having a lot of discussions with other standard setters in various jurisdictions. So we have a network of standard setters, and if we are to start the discussions, I think we can. And if there are other jurisdictions that want to join us, I think that's also possible.
Nobu, we have with us today Paul Munter, who you know, as a guest observer, and he has a question for you.
Hi, Nobu. Nice to see you. You mentioned the SASB standards, and of course, S1 and S2 have this notion of refer to and consider SASB standards, which I think has caused a lot of questioning, at least in some of the circles that I've been in over the last couple of years. Did you get any feedback on what that might mean in your reporting environment, and think about whether you needed to provide guidance on what the expectations are for management to demonstrate that they have referred to and considered the SASB standards?
Yes, thank you for the question. I think we did get several views on how to interpret that requirement under ISSB standards, and I guess we concluded that we want to wait and see what other jurisdictions are doing, so that we won't be on the lower side of the, or in terms of information content. If other jurisdictions are providing more information, we should do more, but we shouldn't be the ones that are doing too much. So in that sense, we are wait and see. But we did in our exposure draft include some guidance on assuming that the SSBJ standards will be subject to assurance. There must be some kind of documentation that goes together with it, but people didn't like that because that was not required under ISSB standards, so we had to take that out. But I think we're providing non-authoritative guidance related to that portion and saying, well, you usually would be expected to provide documentation and explain the thought process, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go through all the requirements. It's just how you scope or how you decided which industries you're in, and for each industry, which part you thought was relevant and what not. So I think that's how far we got so far.
Bastian, is there anything you want to test out about the process from here on with this collaboration on the operational side?
Maybe only to add, I think what Novo has described in terms of doing the research on the actual reporting practice as it exists already, and importantly that thought process going from impacts, risks, and opportunities. That is something that forms part of the project proposal that is in front of the GSB for first discussion today. So that will be definitely part of it. And I think just out of the historic context, it was referenced that in Japan we have a very strong uptake of the GI standards historically, and I think there are actually regional and jurisdictional differences on how you approach the GI standards as a voluntary framework, and the dynamic around how it has seen uptake, and so working with the colleagues at the Sustainability Standards Board in Japan will be very helpful, and hopefully we can replicate that in other jurisdictions to see whether our guidance also needs to pick up on the different entry points that you can have to this. One observation I would make is that in Japan, but also other jurisdictions, what we've seen that there is a combination of a company-specific materiality assessment of sorts, and also a very strong orientation around sectors in terms of actually having sectors collectively taking up the practice. And that's something that I would also want to see in coming through in the research, maybe also because one of our mechanisms to support, and I think it connects a bit to the question also around SASB and what sector standards should do. We have, of course, this strong focus on likely material topics, and we would like to see that coming through in this focus, in this process on impacts, risks, and opportunities. So that would be my addition to that research question. And if the question is from you, Kara, is also around timeline, I think where we have aligned is that now that capacity exists on both sides, that we start to work towards an agreement on how we can collaborate specifically with research tasks, and then building out eventually the guidance when on GI side we have the resources.
Okay, thank you. And a question to both Tomu and Nobu. You're both well travelled. Are there particular sort of cultural influences or contexts that mean that this is a particularly important issue in Japan, or in the way that we tackle this issue as we work through the collaboration?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. I personally, think that the Japanese companies, especially those big ones, they recognize the social responsibility of being a big company and being part of the community, and therefore they always think in a multi-stakeholder lens. So for those companies, it's very natural for them, for the management of those big companies to think about the multi-stakeholder or the double materiality concept. So for us, it seems to be very natural and easy to start with the whole analysis from impact and turn that into how they financially impact the company. So maybe some other jurisdictions might not have that cultural thinking. So for us, we are fortunate that we can start relatively easy, because many of the companies we talk to share that view that you always need to think about multi-stakeholders.
Yes, I think it might be common among the Asian countries, and even we say voluntary reporting, but once we have a guidance and some endorsement from the ministry or like authoritative organizations, and they tend to consider it's near compulsory. And but also the other things about materiality, and probably I see the Japanese company are not good at choosing a particular topic, and they try to cover as many as possible, and not to be criticized by external parties. So that's adding quite a burden, and also for investors' point of view, it's difficult to analyze. So that maybe we could offer some better guidance for Asian cultures and how they can be more open about choosing their own important topics.
That's an interesting insight. Thank you, Tomu. And Nobu, also very interesting to hear that the sort of we and multi-stakeholder angle. Nobu, are there any particular issues that you see around assurance of the reports prepared using the SSBJ standards, and how this guidance that we are developing together might facilitate assurance of the content of reports using the SSBJ standards?
Yes, thank you for the question. So as I referred to earlier about who is required, who is mandated, and from when is up to the securities regulator. Assurance is also the securities regulator's decision to make, and I think they have limited the scope of the information to be assured, and they haven't finalized what, how, or from when, or the level of assurance that should go together with it. So I'm not so sure how the assurance will affect how we do things. It's more, from at least from my perspective, it's more better way to reaching the information that should be provided, and I'm not really thinking about assurance. I maybe should, but I haven't so far.
Well, no worries. I'm sure the big assurance firms are thinking about that, but thank you very much. You've had enough to think about, I think. Are there any more questions for Nobu, or any questions around this collaboration and the work that we are planning here from GSSB members? Or Paul? Or Bastian or Helka? No? Or okay. Well, Nobu, thank you very much indeed for joining us and for all the discussions along the way to get to this point. And we look forward to many more. And hopefully we'll be seeing you again in October for another meeting where we will have progressed a bit further with this. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all. And now the next session is our sector program review paper, which is coming back to the GSSB after we asked for a bit more information, I think particularly around how the two options fit with the general sector standard development process. And we're pleased to have here Helka, the head of the sector standards program.
Yes, so as Carol mentioned, this conversation builds on the session we had in December, where we presented the results of the sector standard. One of the recommendations was about developing interim sector resources to be able to guide reporters in sectors where we would not have a sector standard soon. So the idea is basically to guide reporters and information users in sectors where it's going to take us time to develop sector standards, because we know that with the level of resources that we have, it will take us more than a decade to develop all the 30 standards that are still to be completed. And here you see an outline of the main advantages or the pros of having these interim sector resources. Is basically we will have a faster point to be able to provide this guidance with these interim sector resources, as the time that it requires to complete them is shorter. This will then provide guidance to organizations in their materiality assessment, either because they want to do these reports or because they are required by law to do it. We will develop these interim sector resources through clustering. So we're going to have some efficiencies, and we are still in, if you approve to develop this further and convert it in a project proposal, We will be then given it further thought on how we would cluster these different sectors, perhaps through similar impacts. And the last point that is very important is that doing this is it gives us a very strong point to develop then a fully fledged sector standard. Here you see the differences between the sector standard and an interim sector resource is basically the list of material topics in both. You will have simpler topic descriptions in the interim sector resources, and the key differences are that there are no disclosures, not from the topic standards, not additional sector recommendations on the general topic standards or new disclosures or gaps for the sector. We will both will be having resources and references as they are now in the sector standards, and the publication will be individual either way, even if we develop the interim sector resources via clusters. So now we have these two options. The two options are different in terms of the process, and therefore the product is different. But how it looks like, the outcome is going to be the same. So the document is going to be the same. But there are important differences in these two models. So first, the research paper, we would not have a due process. Mainly, we will have a peer review that it will be multi-stakeholder, but we wouldn't have a public consultation. We wouldn't have a technical committee or working group, and it will be presented as a research paper, which also gives an opportunity to position GRI as a thought leader in new sectors. The timelines will be for each of the clusters, circa 12 months, and then for developing all the 30 sector standards that we have pending will take around 3.5 years. The main benefit, or one of the key benefits, is that there wouldn't be confusion because the product is different and is quite separate from our current ways of developing sector standards. And the disadvantages is that it wouldn't be embedded in the GRI reporting model, so you wouldn't have an incentive for companies or for information users to actually use it. So it may be that is not then, is maybe neglected by the audience. We will have then less, without a public comment period, we will have less opportunities of engagement, less opportunities to make this work visible. And as I mentioned already, it would not be mandated in the report. Now, about the reduced sector standards, so it would follow due process, so it would be embedded in the GSSB framework. It wouldn't have a technical committee or a working group, and again, peer reviewers following a multi-stakeholder composition will be incorporated in developing this reduced sector standard. It will have a public comment period of 3 months, and it will be presented as a reduced version of the sector standard. So to develop a cluster, it will take around 20 to 22 months, and then it will take between 6 and 7 years to develop then the interim sector resources. The main benefit is that it will be embedded in the GRI reporting model. So now, for example, if a company wants to develop a report in accordance with GRI, and if there's a sector standard, they will need to use it. So here, if there's a sector standard or an interim sector resource, they will need to use the likely material topics to guide their materiality assessment. It does have the disadvantage that it may be confusing because it's quite similar to the sector standard in terms of the structure, less detail, but then it may create a confusion. And then it may be that people already have been engaged in the interim sector resource and then have less interest in engaging in the development of a fully fledged sector standard. And it may be as well that then if they already implemented, then they stop at where the reduced sector standard goes and don't actually go and introduce the additional disclosures or additional sector recommendations in a fully fledged sector standard. I think this is the graph that then summarizes the point that was raised by the GSSB in December, is basically how this work can be connected with the development of a fully fledged sector standard. So you will see that if we have business as usual, it will take us 18 years to develop all the sector standards. Then with the reduced sector standards, it takes between 16 and 18 years. And then with the research paper, it takes us a bit less than 16 years. So you see that the gains in terms of developing the fully fledged set of sector standards is not, the gains are not massive. The main advantage, as I see it, is basically that we're able to go sooner with guidance to the different sectors about the likely material topics. And this is my last slide. So basically, it raises the question about, so for which sectors would you be developing this approach? One of the other recommendations that we had in the paper we presented in December is that we would like to continue this further alignment with relevant standard setters. So the idea is that for group one, priority group one, that is the group that we're working currently, we will continue to develop fully fledged sector standards in those sectors where also relevant standard setters have defined that they want also to develop sector standards there. And then forestry, and for the other then sectors in the other groups, we would be then developing interim sector resources. So that's in a nutshell the proposal, and now then you're asked to discuss and recommend if you want us to develop a project proposal for the September Q3 in 2025.
Anna has a question.
Sorry, Bastian, apologies. Also, perhaps you want to add something about the landscape, or maybe as part of the conversation, and how this connect to the current development. Sorry.
No, I think you covered everything. The one consideration that I would add is in looking at the GSB work program going forward, I think there is this resourcing component and time to market component for the sector standards. And I think it's really, we just have to remind ourselves that this is the backdrop of the proposal in the first place. There's very clearly from the review a market demand for this type of guidance. Maybe that's market demand is even more pronounced now because the EU will not develop sector standards. And there will be very many sectors falling under some sort of regulation, and they are looking for this type of well, assistance probably in their reporting process. And I think I would add that as a backdrop to this discussion.
I think we understand that the development of sector standards is urgent and needs to be done as quickly as we can, and that resources are needed to progress it quickly. People like the sector standards that we've been developing. Yes, Anna.
Thank you, Helga, for a presentation. I think it's a very important stream of work. My initial reaction to options 1 and 2 is that I worry that option 1 will have lower adoption. It's research, it's nice. I'm sure some will pick up and read it, but the amount of time we will invest in creating this research might not be then matched with the with how this gets put into practice. So even though it takes a bit longer to create more formal outcome, I think I would be in favor of that. And you know, we can probably mitigate the risk of confusion by the smart choices of words. Then maybe reduced standard shouldn't be how we title it. Perhaps it's the phase 1 or step 1 out of 2, and then, you know, the rest will come. But I think, you know, the research is nice to have, but does it drive standardized reporting? Perhaps not as much as a standard would.
Thank you. Bastian, can you give us, in your experience, some view on the take-up of guidance versus an authoritative standard, whether it's an interim standard or a full standard, please?
I think 2 comments on this from me. Generally speaking, I think in corporate reporting, as soon as something is guidance, and is maybe even below that level as in terms of an articulation of what you could potentially do, that is not the focus of this is not where the energy goes in a reporting process. That would be my general, and that extends certainly out from financial reporting practice into sustainability reporting. But there's a second dynamic that I would highlight. I think we're now in a reality where very many jurisdictions will have some sort of compliance mechanism vis-a-vis reporting. So there is a mandatory element to it, which will always naturally attract significant resource. And when you then match that from our end with something that doesn't even sit within the body of work that you would normally have to take up to demonstrate that you have holistically adopted the standard, then it's really relegated to a lower priority. And therefore, I think historically we can say GI has done a lot around providing additional guidance. But when you look at the download figures, when you look at the engagement that we have on documents, there is a very significant difference between the pieces that build towards eventually some sort of element of standard and the actual standards. We have seen that time and time again. The good work has been done probably conceptually actually on the same level as what ended up in the standard, ended up as a disclosure. But the early stages, this is maybe taken up as leadership practice by a few, but never in a comprehensive way by practitioners. That's what I can say.
And an additional consideration I wanted to add is that when you get assurance over this reporting, assurance providers will not just use guidance as authoritative instrument, that they will go by the standard, which again, I think does not motivate the reporters to apply this to their reporting.
Just to echo, I'm echoing Anna's point as well, that probably the phase one or the research type of paper probably may not get you the kind of benefit for the cost incurred. Helga, just on options 2 and 3 though, is there anything that limits us from issuing, say, for example, a reduced standard and then pulling it out and then bringing in the full standard, because that will stop that confusion of people stopping halfway at the reduced and not going and not adopting the full. So I think, is that an option where we then say, look, we can go to the reduced standard, it's shorter in terms of a time frame, but at the time we are ready with the full standard, we, just like our normal standards, we pull out that standard and issue the full one.
Yeah, that's a good point. Of course, that would be the way to do it, as you did it with the climate standard. Yes.
I think which options to choose, it also depends on what is our purpose and aim of having this interim report. I mean, if it's to ask them to use it as a standard, then I agree that we should go with a more complicated version because it's at least more close to the standard. But if we are providing it as a supplementary to already existing GR standard, mainly for them to have a guidance on how to choose your proper material topics, then I think it doesn't really matter whether it's a standard or it's a guidance or it's a leadership. It's more kind of a supplement and giving some options to choose something in one of the steps. And if the jurisdictions already or will have mandatory requirements on ESD disclosures in all different formats anyway, and I guess materiality assessment, no matter it's double or single, they have to choose material topics, and it will actually be easier for us to have a research paper and tell them no matter which jurisdiction you are, you could use GRI's or experience of choosing your material topics.
Can I just go to Helga? Sorry.
Yeah, today you own a shirt. Yeah. Okay. Have you done any survey to the reporters and to a couple of auditing companies in order to know what they prefer? Have you done a survey between within the companies that are reporting, a few companies that are reporting and a few auditing companies in order to understand what is their view and their preferences?
So as part of the sector review, we did interviews with around 25 to 30 stakeholders. We were focusing the review on the standards that we have now, but we also had the opportunity to talk to, in particular, consultants that actually work in different sectors. And also we were actually talking with 5 reporters that work in sectors that were not, for which we didn't have a sector standard. And it's of course not representative, but my takeaways from these conversations are that there's such a variety of maturity in the sector that you will find a market for everything. So you will have, for example, companies in a sector that they're very progressive. They already have done all the materiality assessments. They would have already had reports and many years already embedded sustainability into their organization and developing a strategy. For them, this kind of product, it would not be useful. But then you would have for those in a particular sector where actually they are coming to sustainability new, for them it would be really useful because then they would know which are the likely material topics. They would know peers. They would see, okay, everyone is reporting on this. They would be able to benchmark themselves. So I think that it's a varied response. You don't have a, yes, there's huge, I think you can find the demand given the variety of progress in the sectors.
Tomu, then Rebecca, then I think Charles and Jeff.
Hello, Tomo speaking. I think to me it's like no matter whether you call on the like research paper or intermediate product, I think its speed matters a lot now, and especially after ESRS is no more publishing the sector standards, which means for GRI it's a now great opportunity to show, and we can provide the sector-specific guidance. And looking at whole the timetable, and then even the fastest option is taking nearly 15 years. It's just daunting, and we never know what's happening in 15 years time. And even SASB, it's depth is quite different, but they took around 6 years to develop the 77 sector guidance. So to me, it's we should take the fastest possible ways to develop as many sector guidance as possible.
I just was going to say something very similar to what Tomo said. I think speed is important. And Robin said that yesterday, that we need to be agile. So if I take that word and look at those years, even 16 years, that doesn't pass the test, I think. That is the opposite of being agile. So one of the questions that comes to mind is, can you give us some more context as to why it takes so long? And then the second question is, can a research paper then, if we have them in between 2 and 4 years, then become reduced sector standards very quickly, and then full standards soon after? What is the transition between the first option and the full-fledged option?
Let's continue to go around people and come back to that. I think what we've heard so far is that this is strategically important. We want sector standards done fast. The question is, what do we do in the meantime to get something out quicker? Bastian's been very clear, I think, that guidance doesn't really cut it. People aren't really using it. And Anna made a similar point with an issue also around assurance. You can't assure against guidance, but you can against standards. So these are things that we need to take into consideration. But let's get some more input and then come back to the standards division. Charles, I think you were next.
Yes, Charles speaking. Thank you. I echoed some of the speed issue. I thought it was month, but now you say years, so I was a bit surprised. How 16 years? But anyway, no, my question is more maybe simple in a way or basic, but all of this has a relationship or impact on topics, because you mentioned material topics within the sector. I think if you reshuffle and do some of these changes or review, I assume that you have coordinated with topics or not, because I'm slightly confused of how this all work together. So.
I think I was next. Thank you, Helco, for the presentation. I think this is spelled out in the paper, but wasn't in the deck. But I just wanted to confirm. So the development of the research papers, for example, takes time off of the development process in the net?
Both of them. Both of them.
So then that implies to me that we could have at least something out to the market vis-a-vis sector papers, and we could finish the entire enterprise a bit sooner, right? So then I guess the only trade-off, if I'm understanding, I want to ask for clarification and confirmation. Would we go the first 3.5 years with no more sector standards developed?
So do you mind? So and also connected to what it takes us too long is because of the level of resources that we have now. So this is also the main assumption behind this graph. So if we basically expand not only the sector team, because we have the connection with the topics and technical and editorial and the other colleagues and communications and all the rest, if we then have 15 colleagues, this looks very different. So it's also regarding the level of resources that we have now. So to your question, we will be then continue developing in this point, for example, when you have, let's say we take the next 4 years, no, 2-3 years to develop the reduced sector standard, we would then continue developing the group one. And then once we have a cluster out, because that is the previous graph is for all the 30 sectors. When we have an interim cluster out, then we can start developing a sector standards. So we would not be stopping or dropping the work that we have developing fully fledged sector standards.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
And an exposure draft would be a form of guidance in the meantime, whilst the interim sector standard is being developed.
I think to build on the earlier comments, and I think that relates also to the audit element. I think it would be a source of inspiration, but it is really important to have it as part of the standards. I don't think we will see consultants would certainly look at it and they will engage in it, but where we are at this stage in the evolution, I think we have to close out something and make it part of the body of work that we're so that we receive real uptake. So just to add one comment in terms of the timelines, it's very important what Helga had said about this was the current resourcing of the team, but importantly also GI overall, because we are already going to issue more than 15 standards next year, which from a corporate reporting standard setting perspective is an awful lot. But the other piece is we are comparably fast when it comes to actually issuing the individual standards already. So it is really how you overlay projects and how many you run in parallel where you actually gain time. But we've condensed the due process and the multi-stakeholder component. You can always gain a couple of months, give and take, and there might be differences between different sectors and how you arrange it. But it is comparably fast the way the standards are developed right now. What we risk to lose otherwise is the multi-stakeholder component and the public exposure component, because you can, for example, and you see that in some regulatory processes, you can cut corners in terms of how long you expose or how deep you engage. But that goes a bit against the grain of how GI has been successful in building comprehensive standards. One addition from me then is to highlight and tying it back to the work program discussion. There is a prioritization element here for us once we start moving and we have a batch of interim sector resources available. That also enables us to look to the market and say there are certain sectors that are more prominent, where we see more significant uptake, that are open to fast-track development of a fully fledged standard. But right now we're lacking that connection into the market for specific sectors because we're not providing any guidance. I think that could also speed up some of the dynamics around how we prioritize and where we want to focus. So that's just another political consideration.
I'm not sure that I'm understanding the graph, but we just go back to the graph. I think Helga, the fact is that by the 15th year, you'll only have 2 standards or 3 standards remaining, right? Because it's a cumulative effect. it's not everything's not going to wait until the 15th year for all 30 to come out, right? So if you
No.
just go on that path,
So this is the full package of work that is in front of us, and the full categorization of sectors along the lines of business activities that we agreed on at some point, give and take 40 things.
Yeah.
4 groups and 3 groups that we're focusing on for the interim sector resource. And that would be the totality of developing this whole body of work. But you would have parts of this released much earlier. So we're not.
Exactly. Yeah, which is why I didn't think that the timing is that.
So after my retirement, we will release it.
I think it was that I don't think you'll have a situation where our reporters are waiting for 15 years to get a whole bunch of them would be satisfied in the first 2, 3 years, 4 years, whatever.
Couple quick comments. I think perhaps, Bastian, in the future sessions, it would be helpful for us to just go through a life cycle of the creation of the standard, because, it's a standard, perhaps it takes, a few weeks to create one, but if you just walk us through, what does it take? So we can all understand, like, why is it that it's years? There are very good reasons, but I think it's important for us to just go back to basics and remember, like, all the resources that are needed, that the timelines that one needs to follow for them to be credible, I think would be probably helpful to reset, to gain confidence that it is the right amount of time. And then, if I'm remembering correctly, many years ago, did GRI publish a list of relevant topics by sector as simply guidance, which went nowhere and was quickly forgotten? So I think we have a precedent where we have done it, and it didn't have the effect that we hoped it would.
Can I just say that there's nobody on the Zoom, and Julie hasn't joined yet, so we don't have to use the microphone. There's nobody on Zoom.
For the recording, for the live stream?
For the live.
The live YouTube is still on.
Yeah, but
We can use it, sure.
Okay.
Sure, keep using them. It's so important.
Yeah. I like this by now. So 2 points. I think that it came up in a different context, but sessions on the process that has been developed over the years to look at topic standards under due process and sector standards. That's something we will organize for the GSB members to just go over the whole process. And there's of course a due process protocol update. We won't see any significant changes coming through, but it's a good moment to actually remind everyone what the current due process actually entails in terms of actions along the way to bring about a standard. The second piece is absolutely correct. There was an effort to provide this additional guidance at a different point in time in relation, I think, to the work that the colleagues at SASB have been doing. That was one of the considerations. They were in the early years of their development. And it is precisely for that reason. We only see some markets where these documents are still used and considered, and they come up in conversation, but wholesale, they have not been a reference point for the materiality assessment. And our analysis at the time was actually, we've cut it very short on the engagement side of things. And the other element is the actual descriptions of the topics are not substantiated enough that you could actually relate to it in a materiality determination. That was one of the other learnings from that process.
Thank you very much, and thanks for explaining the time frame again. I was like, wow, looking into the future. I suppose kind of 2 concerns and issues come to mind. I think for me, there is this question as if the public exposure multi-stakeholder element or component is reduced, there is a question about, I think, the GRI value and the extent to which the GRI brand is affected. So I think that's something that we do have to take into consideration. I suppose it's because I'm thinking that, I'm sure you've looked at this in terms of your research and prep for this, but there's so many industry specific projects, analysis, in relation to the different sectors, but GRI obviously brings something quite different to the mix and that global recognition. So I think I would be a little bit wary of streamlining that out of the process where we'd gain a couple of years. But I think there could be like real concerns about what's lost overall. But I also would be really interested in, tapping into, I think Anna made the point, some of the learning from the way that the sector standards have been developed and the ones that are currently under development. And yeah, I just wonder if, just reflecting whether it's in line with, a company putting reporting regime in place. Obviously, you do a lot of investment up front, but then you get quicker about how you conduct that process, even though the stages are still there. So I guess that's where I am, following on from the questions you've asked and the presentation you've just given.
Thank you, Anne. I think overall we're hearing strong support for the interim sector standard approach. But if anybody wants to speak in favour of the research paper option, please do so. And Jeff.
Thanks, Carol. One thing again, just to make sure I'm understanding correctly, because there was a reference made earlier to what we're losing by, for example, doing the research paper route. If I've understood correctly, we still get to 30 full-fledged sector standards faster with that research paper approach, because doing the work of developing the research papers gives you some efficiencies in developing the final sector standards, right?
Yes.
So from my perspective, there really is nothing lost. We get out to the market sooner with something, and we finish the job sooner, thanks to the efficiencies built into doing 30 of something, right? So I just wanted to make sure, did I understand that correctly? And I wanted to make sure all the GSSB members understood that as well.
Yeah, so that's correct. If the only element we're looking into is speed, yes, you do that with the research. Then the other element is about the uptake. No? So if we do quicker, but then no one, or is very limited the uptake, that's the other element to consider.
So that's the point, and Anne made the point about the GRI brand and the multi-stakeholder input that we'd get through the development of an interim sector standard. Igazuma?
Yes. Thank you. Just to mention that even though, a lot of us are looking more towards the interim sector standards, I was wondering if there was any reference at all. We've thought about any reference to guidance that have supported materiality, not GRI, obviously, because based on what you say, they haven't been very, but are there other examples perhaps we can learn from? Because the concern of the timeline of the interim sector is still, it's still significant in the room. But with the research paper, as Jeff said, we come out earlier, but the major issue is that it's not used, it's not utilized. So I'm wondering if there are lessons from any other guidances that have formed materiality that we could learn from. Is it more promotion, communication, education? What can we learn?
Maybe I can respond to that. So I think the point was made that there is a lot of activity on sector level in terms of supporting reporting, but also say the general approach to transparency, accountability, and oftentimes in the context of a more narrow focus, financial risk and opportunity, right? What we have seen is, and this is the very reason that we, I think, brought the sector standards into the mix at some point, is that there is a significant gap when it comes to the holistic view to the impacts of a sector as an input to these type of considerations. And that is kind of the unique positioning that GI has, from a global level, but also a process that brings in all the authoritative references and brings in the different constituencies in developing that. So we have nothing to point to your question specifically right now that would do the same thing by a different author, by different institutions. We don't have that. There are sectors where where things have been originated that are closer probably to what you would find in a GI sector standard, but really with this holistic perspective towards reflecting on the likely material topics for a sector wholesale, that is not something that you see in the same fashion developed in any of the sectors we've looked at so far.
Yeah, thank you so much for speaking. And I think this is very strategic issue and also communication issue. And I understand, also I value this multi-stakeholder process and the rigorous development process. But at the same time, and 18 years time, then I don't want to say, but if GRI is forgotten by then there is no point of making all the sector separate, sector standards. So I think it's really important to focus on speed and then even like a research paper type of thing, and still we can do multi-stakeholder way, and which keep our kind of important feature. And but this is quite important issue to, I don't know, GSSB decide everything, but it's either speed or rigorousness. It's quite like we really have to have a proper discussion.
Can I raise another issue? Speed is important, but I think the rigor and the points we've made about the standards and the engagement take up also really important. If we go down the route of the interim standards, I would have thought it would make sense to me that we would be more likely to be able to raise funds to develop further the interim sector standards than we would to develop the guidance. So I can see there's a bit of a quandary here, but if we go for the interim sector standards approach and start down that path, it would seem logical to me that we might be more likely to get funds for that and therefore get the thing finished quicker. Would you like to respond to that?
I think I would generally say that having clear visibility for the priorities from a standard setting perspective enables GI to raise funds, and having a clear articulation of the product that we're developing in this independent process that helps GI to look for partners and resourcing. And yes, I think in the overall sustainable development discussion, and maybe particularly now, as opposed to last year, time to market and actually having products out is becoming a lot more important also to those that provide capacity to institutions like GI. So the timing it's definitely more difficult to tell the story about a 3-year process for 30 things than it is to say there's a cluster, there's a established process, multi-stakeholder with the consultation, and we are actually able to move things in a much more time-bound fashion. I think that packaging works definitely better. Yeah.
So can I suggest then? Oh, Helga,
Yeah,
sorry.
sure. Just a couple of thoughts on reflecting on the discussion. And perhaps the graph gives the wrong impression, but it's not that we will just then go and hide and then come in 15 years with the sector standards. So we will be then continue working in the work that we have. We have textiles, financial services that are going to be published next year. We're going to be developing new fully sector standards. So the work of the sector standard will continue to be then brought to the market. My background is on sustainability standards that are not connected with the financial angle. Having less than 3 years to develop a full new standard for a sector is not bad. And I also want to stress that the relevance of the work that we do is about the process as well. That the common understanding in a sector, these are the topics that are important. These are the things we want to report on, and we agree on that. And then I think, for example, with AI or with other tools, we may be able to actually speed up things down the road once we have more clarity on how we want to use them. So I think we're going to be looking at synergies and perhaps shorter period. And to respond to the question from Charles about the topics, so we do connect with the topics. So the sector standards build on the topics that the colleagues have developed, and this is where we draw the disclosures. The more complete the topics are, the less are the gaps that we need to develop. So for example, we have now spent time on topics that have where we don't have topics for in the GRI architecture. Once those are more complete, then we also have less time needed to develop sector standards. So I think we're going to be seeing also the evolution of this and take this also as a model that is static at the moment, but it will be changing as technology is available and as the topic standards are developed.
From people we haven't already heard from, if they want to say something, and then I think we have to draw this discussion to a close.
So I'm trying to compare the two options for the interim standard development, and I see there is a difference between them. So the research paper indeed has a better, like benefits from the speed, but I see the difference. While both of these option 1 and 2 have a trade-off of compromising a little bit a multi-stakeholder component and public exposure component, I understand. In addition, the research paper option also does not follow the GSSB due process. Can we understand? Maybe because that is a bit worrying. So I would like to understand what does it mean to assess, whether really research paper is option can be acceptable.
So basically, it would be separate from the due process. The GSSB would be approving those documents. Either way, we know that's also common. We bring here research papers and we make them available. So that is not something that is fully uncommon on the ways of one. But here, for example, the due process would not be followed, in particular because you don't have the public comment period. So that is the key element that then you have in the review sector. I don't know, Jimmy, if it's possible to put on the screen the paper, because or if you have it in front of you, in Annex 2, you see the derivation of each of the options, like our sector standard, the option 1 and the option 2, and then you see what are the different phases of the project that are covered or not. And then here perhaps it's easier to see, for example, that the savings in the research are because you don't have the public comment period, and then you don't need to revise. So that is the chunk of time that you basically gain.
Thank you. I think it's going in one particular way, but let's have a vote. We can see what people think. Is everybody clear of the arguments for each thing? Right, okay. Who's in favour of option 1, the research paper option? And option 2, the interim sector standard?
I am abstained. Abstained. I cannot choose. I'm abstained. No, abstained.
Option 2.
Abstain?
Yeah, yeah, abstained.
1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, option 1 again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, that was close. My Michael, that was as close as it gets, really. So I think what we would ask you to do then is to develop this timeline and process for the interim sector standard and bring that back. We'll have another look at it. There are obviously some people with some doubts. And in the meantime, if we can ask GRI to test out the availability of or the likelihood of getting funding for the fully fledged interim sector standard approach so that we can speed this up and not lose too much time. Does that sound like a reasonable way forward?
Maybe one additional suggestion there in terms of an action. I think we have to go back, and I think based on the discussion, we have to provide probably a bit more detail on the staging of how the two options go down. I think that would be my reflection, because we've looked at it from this totality perspective of 15, 16 years where nobody can really contextualize what that means. And we, in developing the project proposal, we can also demonstrate over a timeline how these batches of interim sector resources or research papers, because that's a commonality between the two things, would become available and how that goes down.
I think we've got a little bit past the comparative staging here, because we've talked also about take up and download. So it's not just an issue of timing. There were other factors that were that were mentioned.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure why we would do that. I mean, an exposure draft, in a sense, is some form of guidance.
What I'm referring to is just in terms of the decision making, also for the work program and everything. The next stage is to look at how you develop this over time for the next 3 years. So are we going to start 1 or 2 of these batches? How does it look like? What's the carrying capacity with current resources in terms of running parallel, fully fledged sector standards projects? And we will have to decide between that. So it's not another moment to choose between the two, but just to show how this goes down. And we will have to have a dedicated session on the overall sector program approach in the GSB work program for the next years anyway. So we will bring that back. And then the other commitment that we're making is based on all these discussions, we can bring a full project proposal in the third quarter to the GSSB.
But really important from the discussions, I think everybody is concerned about the timeline, which was the attraction of the research paper option. We need to find additional resources to fund this. Yeah.
Can I just ask, what is the optimal resourcing that would be needed in terms of staff for an agile?
No. So
process?
I think we can tell you right now what is the optimal configuration for an individual project, right? There are certain synergies when you run more projects, but there are also, from an institutional perspective, and also from a standard setting perspective, issues when you run too many projects in parallel. That's a bit too, I think the sector standards stand out a bit because it is actually helpful for individual sectors, and it's not like the topic standards. If we change all topic standards all the time, nobody can actually interact with the system. That's something, and the institution cannot set them in the market in the right way. But to come back to the core of the question, we know how much it takes in terms of resourcing money and human resource to develop the standards, and we can overlay that. But it has a lot to do with the question, how many of these things do you want to develop? And the point is taken that ideally on the sector side, you would have as many available as possible. But we are, and Helga made the point, we are also acutely aware that currently the overall capacity of GRI to actually set things into the market is actually much more limiting factor than the capacity of the standards division to develop standards, because there's a communication angle to it, there's an implementation side to it, there's capacity building. All of this is needed. The success of GRI has depended very strongly on that as well. It's not just making the documents available. And so it's resourcing that does not only pertain to the standards division, but to all the other departments of GRI as well.
Okay, more resources needed. And now it's time for a break. We'll be back at 1:45. Thank you. Thank you, Elke.
It's a bit cold.
Recording stopped.
Where my jacket here?
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, Susanna. Jill.
Good to see you. I'm surprised to see you. How are you? Good morning. Good morning, Malcolm. Well done.
How are you?
Fine, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm okay.